Now, I'm not going to go over every good rage you might want to use because there's a total of 250 some, and even considering only the good ones, there are still dozens to consider. That'd take forever, but I might make a special video for that someday if there's enough demand. Instead, I'm just going to go over the two tactics that make Gao jump from top tier to broken mess. The best known one is Wind God Gao, which is the result of a programming oversight. It only works in the SNES version, as it was fixed in all subsequent re-releases, including the one on the PS1. I use the term fixed loosely, as instead of actually closing the loophole, they just took the merit award away from Gao and Gogo. Said merit award is a relic that allows its bearer to equip any weapon or armor in the game. Generally, I don't like using it because not only does it take away each character's individuality, it's also rarely worth sacrificing a relic slot for. Wind God Gao, however, would be the exception. The Merit Award allows Gao to wield Cyan's Kazekiri, which was known as the Tempest in the original translation, and paired up with the Master's Scroll and the Stray Cat Rage, you could easily devastate anything in the game. The way this works is that, as I've said before, the Kazekiri has a 50% chance of casting Wind Slash, and due to the aforementioned programming oversight, Cat Scratch happens to quadruple not only the damage of your physical attack, but also that of any effects that substitute that physical attack, such as the Kazekiri's Wind Slash. The Master's Scroll purpose in this build, as you might expect, is to give you 4 attacks for the price of 1 and 4 attempts per turn at quadruple damage Wind Slashes. It was so brutally powerful that Square took note and removed the Merit Award from both Gao and Gogo, who can also use Rage. The other one is less popular, but every bit as effective, and not caused by a programming oversight. This means that it works equally in every version of the game, including the Game Boy Advance port. It also has the benefit of not requiring any relic slot. All you need is the Rafflesia Rage. Rafflesia is that flower you fight by looking at one of the portraits in Bowser's mansion in the World of Ruin, and it's very important that you do that battle before completing the dungeon. Otherwise, you won't be able to do it afterwards, and the rage will be lost forever. But on to what it does. It confuses one enemy, but it's not the same kind of confusion you usually encounter in this game. It's a status that's more or less permanent, meaning that hitting the confused monster with a physical attack won't dispel the status. The only way this can happen is if Gao dies. The one drawback is that only one monster at a time can have that status, but even against multiple targets, this is really good, because it essentially takes the afflicted monster out of the battle, but it definitely shines the most against single targets. If you manage to land the attack, you pretty much automatically win. The best part is that, unlike regular confusion, everything is weak to it, even the final boss. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed that. It's the next best thing to an instant win button. The only enemies that can actually break out of it are Kaiser Dragon and Omega Weapon, and only at predetermined points in the battle to boot. Those are exclusive to the Game Boy Advance version, for the record, so players of other versions will find it to be completely foolproof. Most broken RPG character ever? Possibly. Back to Earth for our next character, Setzer Gabiani. The original gambler of the Final Fantasy series, he's also the one who's the best at capturing the essence of that class, both through some of his signature weapons and his special ability slots. Early after you get him, that'll be your main source of damage, despite its unreliability. Okay, I say it's unreliable, but if you're good enough, you can make it workable somewhat easily. Now there are weird tricks to manipulate the slots to do your bidding, including ways to win any battle with the mighty Joker's death attack, but I won't get into that because I consider it cheating. Even so, if you have good coordination, you'll be able to match 3 images, a requirement for a special attack to be performed. Of course, said attack depends on the images you line up. If you fail, you'll summon the Mysidian Rabbit, who will heal your party for pathetically low amounts of HP, and whose name seems to be a reference to Final Fantasy IV. One thing you'll probably notice is that you'll be able to get some of the weaker attacks, such as Prismatic Flash and Chocobo Stampede, without even trying, since they're rigged in your favor most of the time. However, the reverse is also true, in that no matter how hard you try to get something like Mega Flare, or God forbid Joker's Death, you will find that these are rigged against you. So, if you get them without manipulating the RNG, go get yourself a lottery ticket. If you equip this relic called Hyge's Jitte, how am I supposed to pronounce that? Anyway, what this does is transform Sedzer's slots into a different skill called Guild Toss, which is exactly what it sounds like. It throws away your hard-earned money for damage. Just like Shadow, except Shadow's way is far cooler and far more cost-effective too. The amount of money thrown away every time you use Guild Toss is Sedzer's level multiplied by 30, and the damage done is double that amount, split evenly against all enemies. As I said, if you're going to spend Guild to do damage, don't waste a relic slot on Sedzer and use Shadow instead. Unfortunately, Sedzer isn't exactly what you'd call a powerhouse, no thanks to low stats across the board, with only the more or less useless strength being acceptable. The reason why I say his strength is useless is because despite ignoring Ro, his weapon selection is still bleh, with none of them coming even close to Locke's Hawkeye relative to when they're found in the game. In fact, the only weapon you should ever use that fight command with is the fixed dice, which is purely the result of its damage formula, and isn't made more powerful by strength. This is why you want to boost magic power on Sedzer. It powers up both your slots as well as magic. Oh, by the way, for some reason Sedzer can equip heavy armor. Thank God, because he'd probably be a sad character if he was as bad as Sabin in that department. But a gambler is not something that screams heavy armor. Esper Time is an area where he suffers, though, since despite joining forces with you as early as after the opera scene, he won't actually be usable in battle until Terra rejoins after escaping the southern continent. At least the World of Ruin compensates for this to an extent, since he's gotten early into it, and he's even forced into your party for Daryl's Tomb, where you will gain a few levels. As for how to play Sedzer through the game, as I said, most of his weapons are garbage, so you'll be using slots a lot for damage. Fortunately, even the weaker, easier slots are really strong for that point in the game. Prismatic Flash is more powerful than Sabin's Aura Cannon against a single target, and deals very similar damage to Rising Phoenix against multiple enemies. Meanwhile, Chocobo Stampede is as powerful as the very high-end Meteor spell, one that you can't get until very late into the World of Ruin, and we're still talking about the late stages of the World of Balance here. The drawback, of course, is that floating enemies are immune to Chocobo Stampede, and there are a lot of them in the last third of the World of Balance, so you'll be a lot better served by Law Duel-wielding Hawkeyes. When you get to the World of Ruin, though, you'll realize slots are really falling behind, and the fixed dice are needed if you want to do high damage. The big problem with that is, they're found in Kefka's Tower, which means you'll be faced with loads of rabid beasties that will effectively be the equivalent of tough boss fights if you go there right after getting the Falcon. The good news is that they're very early into the first party's path, so you can feasibly go in, grab them, and get out before the random battles demolish you. There are two ways to do this. You can recruit Mog, snag Malulu's Charm, which is a Mog-only relic that prevents random battles entirely. Then send him off into Kefka's Tower to retrieve the fixed dice. If you don't want to wait that long, at least obtain Phantom Rush, Terra, and Gao right after getting the Falcon first, then send your 4 best available characters in the first party, sticking the last 2 in the other 2 parties, try to live long enough to get the dice, switch to another party, and escape immediately. It may seem like a lot of work, but if you plan on using Sedzer at all before Kefka's Tower, this is the only way to make him decent. Not only are the fixed dice Sedzer's best weapon, but that is magnified even further with the Master's Scroll. Sure, any Fight Command user is instantly better with it, but it applies double to Sedzer, because remember how I said it made you land 4 hits at half damage earlier on? Well, the fixed dice have fixed damage, so that half damage bit doesn't apply anymore. That's right, your overall damage output with the Master's Scroll is quadrupled instead of doubled. This also has the added effect of offsetting the whole random damage aspect of the fixed dice, since the more dice rolls you get, the closer you get to your average damage output for each individual turn. So in the end, Sedzers needs the Master's Scroll almost as much as the dice themselves, but Locke also desperately needs it. This means that you should never use the two together, since you only get one Master's Scroll in any version other than the Game Boy Advance one. And even there, you can only get extras in the Soul Shrine. And even there, it's so impossibly hard that, you know what? Even in the Game Boy Advance version, you only get one. And for those multi-party dungeons like Kefka's Tower and the Dragon's Den, you'll need to stick Locke and Sedzer in separate parties and keep swapping the Master's Scroll constantly. It's a bit tedious, but it's really worth it to allow both of them to pull their weight. Finally, I guess I should mention that if for some reason you don't want to use the fixed dice, Sedzer gets the final trump very early on in the Dragon's Den. It's still nowhere near many of the other Dragon's Den weapons, but for a more standard, reliable way of doing damage, I guess this is your best option. Except you need a ton of strength boosts to make this worthwhile, which really screws over your potency with magic. That's another advantage of the fixed dice. You can freely sacrifice strength in favor of the magic stat. Mascot characters are often a love or hate affair. Mog's worth in battle is just as polarizing between those who think he's nothing but Molulu's charm fodder and those who can appreciate how hard it is to kill. Like many other characters, Mog's strengths and weaknesses vary greatly depending on which world you're in, and the special skill set is his trademark early on. Just like with Gao's rages, Mog's dances make him uncontrollable, though they don't work in nearly the same way. When he successfully starts a dance, every turn he'll use one of 4 attacks at random, and those attacks and their frequency vary depending on the dances. 2 of those moves are more common, with odds of 7 out of 16 and 6 out of 16, and the other 2 are much more rare, with odds of 2 out of 16 and 1 out of 16. Do note that the rarer attacks aren't necessarily more powerful, especially since some attacks are featured in 2 dances, and they're rare in one of them and common in the other. You learn dances by winning battles in the terrain that corresponds to the dance with Mog in your party. For example, you learn the Desert Lullaby by winning a battle in the desert. Getting the dance started can be a little more complicated. If you choose the home dance, for example, the Forest Nocturne in the forest, you will always succeed, but if you select another dance, Mog has a 50% chance of stumbling and failing. Upon success, the terrain will be changed to the one that corresponds to the dance, so you're never going to fail afterwards. But that also means you shouldn't use dances when trying to learn other dances. On that note, like with rages, I'm not going to go over every dance, but I will quickly tell you that the best ones are Wind Rhapsody, Water Harmony, and to a certain extent Earth Blues. So if any of these dances are the home dance, you know what to go for. If they aren't, you can always consider using the home dance, because even if it's worse than these 3, at least you're certain to get it started right off the bat.